A'udzubillahi samil alim minasyaitonir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Dear brothers and sisters, all praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, that we get His mercy. The Alhamdulillah, we can meet for this sessions 5. Salat and salam must be present to Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, dear brothers and sisters, we are going to have our meeting today on the wealth and ownership in Islamic economics. So let's come at the learning outcome after the sessions. You are the students enabled to elaborate the wealth definitions between Western and Islamic perspective, then analyze the types of wealth in Islam, and lastly expand the essence of wealth in Islamic perspective. Those are the outline today that we are going to discuss. The first, we are going to discuss on definitions on wealth. It is on the Western and also Islamic perspective, type of wealth, and essence of wealth in Islamic perspective. So let's come into some introductions. As we have discussed in the earlier discussions, capitalists, they view that property is all ownership of which individual society, by mean that the property itself, it can be obtained by the individual, and they are free to have this kind of private property. So assets are obtained, wealth are obtained from the result of person's hard working or hard works, so that he is fully entitled to the expenditures of asset he owns. So he has the freedom to get the wealth as it is his ownership, and after that he can also distribute as it is for his expenditures. So capitalist system, due to its emphasis on the private property rights and individual freedom, has led to a high degree of wealth inequality. So because of in capitalism system, they have freedom of private property right, then it create the inequality in wealth among the society between the richest group and out of the society and the poor one. So the inequality income and also wealth is going to be into very high. It's going to be from the rich person and come into the poor one, due to the concentrations of wealth in the few hands. Because of the one who has wealth is going to be like just few hands. So the monopoly of market by financially powerful group, it has been criticized for its failure to provide all of for all of humanity. So, but in another hand, socialists, they view on the opposite. What is that? Property is something that must be owned jointly by members of society in one country. So it is kind of the things property that owned jointly by the members of society itself. So in this case, the state becomes the people's representative to manage those assets. So in another hand, there is no any freedom of private rights, but it must become into the state. So the socialist system gives the state or the community associations ownership of most productive resources and limit individual ownership and economic freedoms. Even though it does not abolish ownership outright, it limits the private ownership to a small set of customer product, and also limit the right of private agents in making economic decisions. So let's come into the consequence. So ownership in this wealth has an impact of social status on the community. Due to the definitions and view of the capitalists and socialists, it create the impact into social status. Those are the richest and those are the poorest. On this different in the social strata creates conflict among them. That's going to be have the social conflict because of the social strata itself. So both of this view, capitalists and socialists, put wealth as the main objective in economic activity. Because of two ideology point of view, capitalism and also scholarism, capitalists and socialists, they put the main objective and economic is the wealth. Wealth is the fundamental focus on materialism. All economic activities are focused on controlling larger assets. Both of these indeed ideologies are free from religious value. So as we know and discussed earlier in the socialist itself, so they mentions as religions is opium. So it must be the free value of the religious value. It is focused on rationality, which tend to be scholarism, aspirations among the religions, and also other activities, other worldly affairs. So coming to the definitions, according to Merriam-Webster, wealth is what? First, going to be all property that has a money value or an exchangeable value. So in the modern terminology, which is mentioned by Merriam-Webster, it is all property that has a money value. Stated in the beginning, a money value or an exchangeable value. The things can be exchanged among the others. And secondly, the definitions are material objects that have economic utility. So it's emphasizing on the economic activity come into materialism. So well in the terms of Al-Quran, named by Al-Malu wal-Amwal. So in Al-Quran will Ahadith, wealth, it is named by Al-Malu wal-Amwal. Malun, malani, amwalun. So namely all kinds of wealth owned by humans such as money, fields, and livestock. It is Majma' Lugha Arabiya. So what is exactly the definitions of wealth? Asset has a broad meaning. So wealth itself has a broad meaning, namely anything that has economic value that is owned by humans. So it is on the linguistic terminology. So come into the definitions of wealth or amwal in Arabic terms. So al-malu is defined by Hanafi scholars. So among the scholars, there are 2 points of view. The first is Hanafi scholars. Second is Jumhur or majority scholars. So what is according to Hanafi scholars? It is any good that individual like naturally. Like the beginning of mal, in the word mal, mala yamilu, that people like to, the people that actually tend to come to this thing, it's going to be al-malu, and can save for sometimes. So because of the definitions of Hanafis, anything that can be saved for sometimes can be stored in some period. So anything that cannot be owned and cannot be stored, it is not property. According to Hanafi point of view, the thing that it cannot be stored, so it is not property. So the use of an item is not property according to Hanafi scholars. So whereas Jumhur or majority scholars define it is anything with economic value according to which it may be sold and for which a transgressor should compensate the owner. So according to Jumhur, it is mentioned by Imam As-Suyuti. So it is kind of anything that has the economic value and afterward can be sold, and for the which people that they transgressor, they break the things here, the wealth here, so it must be, or they should compensate the owner. According to Al-Majallah, in the item 125, defines owned property as what is that? Anything owned by human being, be it a specified property and usufruct of a property. So referring to the definition of Jumhur, wealth or asset can be explained by the first, something that has a value based on the custom or cultures. So people, they view one item, it is valuable, but another people will view this thing is not valuable. So it must be based on the custom and cultures which society view it is as well or not well that apply in society. This asset includes physical goods as well as their benefits or usufruct. So going to be like, it's not only merely about physical material good or material things, but also come into usufruct or benefits. It is permissible to use asset in accordance with Sharia. Again, emphasizing on the wealth, it must be accordance to Sharia, accordance with the Sharia in the normal circumstance, not in the emergency such as carcasses and also blood. So yes, in the darurah or emergency, you may apply this point, but in the normal point, well, it's going to be in accordance with Sharia, not into violence of Sharia. So ownership in the same perspective, there are actually can be 5 things here can we get when discuss. So the ultimate owner of wealth is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is mentioned, وَلِلَّهِ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا. So the ultimate owners, all of the wealth in here and hereafter is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty. So on the things in this world, on the things, whether it is in the terms of the air, the soil, the gas, the water, all are in the ownership of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whatever wealth man does possess has been received from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, Allah has bestowed upon you, atakallah. So it must be come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the principle of Islamic perspective, ownership that we have is exactly come from Allah, that Allah give to us. So in the third, man has to use it in such a way that his ultimate purpose should be on other worlds. So should be in the hereafter. So when we want to use this kind of wealth, the ownership, it must be come into the orientations to akhirah. It is mentioned, وَبْدَغِ فِي مَا آتَاكَ اللَّهُ الدَّارُ الْآخِرَةِ. Please seek the thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give to, bestow it you for the ad-darul akhirah. It is for another world or hereafter. 4. Since wealth has been received from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, its exploitation's payment must necessarily be subject to the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes. So we become Khalifatullah fil ardi, the one who become Khalifa, the one, the vice current, that we have to make prosperity among people and humanity. So it must be necessary exactly to subject to the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ta'atullah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So fifth, the divine commandment has taken two forms. The first is Allah may command man to convey a specific portions of wealth to another. So like in, for the example such as a zakat, this commandment must be obeyed because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala done good by you. So he might command you to do good by another. Do good as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala done good by you. Wahsin kama ahsanallahu ilaik. So like some portions of zakat, infak, sadaqah, so this kind of wealth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commend us in order to have a specific amount, portions of our wealth. So secondly, he might forbid you to use this wealth in a specific way, like he has every right to do so, because he cannot allow you to use wealth in the way which is likely to produce collective ills or to spread disorder on the earth. Do not seek the spread disorder on the earth. وَلَا تَبْغِي الْفَسَادَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like for the example, forbid us to do riba, interest. So it's going to be like, in the terms of wealth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala command us to share some portions to others. And another way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid us to do some transactions such as riba. So ownership in classifications Islamic perspective, there are three point of view. The first going to be individual ownership. So Islamic economic give a freedom of individual ownership, but not into a very wide aspect. But I mean that there are some constraints in order to have this individual ownership. Secondly, into public ownership. Lastly, going to be state ownership. Let's come one by one into the detail. So private ownership of resources is recognized as God has created the world with natural resources for people to enjoy. Private owners are entitled to returns on their labor and capital investment. So private ownership is Sharia stipulations which allows the owners to take advantage of those goods as well as obtain the good compensations for usefulness taken by others such as rent or consumptions of the goods. So their authority rendering to people to spend and performs various forms of transactions on property owned, such as trade, mortgage, lease, grant, wills, and others, is a roof of recognitions of Islam on their individual ownership right. So you, as some economic agent, you may do with your own property, but again, in the way of Sharia. So the private ownership is also always into Sharia accordance. You may trade, you may do some consumptions, you may do having compensations to others, having trading, mortgage, lease, grant, or others, partnership to others. So it is what Islam give us the right on individual ownership. Come into public ownership. So there are 3 point of view, three aspect here. The first is public facilities. As it mentions in Hadith, Muslims associate together own in the three things: water, pastures, and fire. In the other Hadith, there are additional and price is haram. So like narrated by Imam Ahmad, Abu Dawud, Ibn Majah. So by means it's public facilities such as water, pastures, and also fire. So people can own together with this kind of ownership. Secondly, natural resources which are forbidden to own by individual or certain groups. Like for the example, city of Mina is place residence for everyone who comes first. Dari Imam Tirmidzi, Ibnu Majah, and Al-Hakim. So natural resources which actually is not being owned by only individual or certain group. It must be come into the public ownership. The third, unlimited mining. Then he came to Rasulullah SAW asking for mine salt. So then he gave it. After he left, there was a man who asked him, "Oh, Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, do you know what you give him? Look, you have to give something like water flowing." Then he said, then Messenger pulled back from her mine. So narrated by Imam Abu Nawad. So unlimited mining. So it is come into public ownership. So third, state ownership. There are 9 things here. The first is treasures of Ghanima, Amwal Ghanima, Al-Anfal, asset acquired from the spoils of the war with Kafir. 5, treasures obtained from the enemy without fighting, and Khums. There are Anfal, there are Fay, there are Khums. Treasures comes from Kharaj, the right of Muslim over land acquired from Kafir, either through war or not. There are also come into jizya, the right given by God to the Muslims of the Kafir as their subjects to Islam. So we have treasures from Texas. So we have treasures from Ansur. So from the luxury merchant and others. So we have there is no heirs. There is no any ahlul waris and access property from the rest of inheritance, amwal al-fadla. So treasures left by murtad people. So asset incurred illegally by rulers, state employees, treasures obtained is not land with Sharia. And lastly, other asset belonging to asset such as to state, such as desert, mountains, beaches. So we have seen and the dead land, there is no owner. So it's going to be the state ownership. So when we come into this kind of diagram, ownership in some perspective, there are 3: private ownership, public ownership, and state ownership. When we come into private ownership, we can do with working, inheritance, hibah, or other. From the public ownership, it can be from the all facilities which are really needed by many people, categorized water, pastures, fire, natural resources which are not forbidden to be owned by individual, and unlimited mining. Lastly, state owners going to be ghanima, kharaj, usur, tax, and other properties which are less ownership and unusable land and others. So it's going to be state-owned enterprises which operate in this interest are not allowed to be privatized. So that's the point that we have in the discussions. So for the example, in the public ownership, we have for the way in Indonesian cases, like we have this kind of area. We have the categorizing water, pastures, so fire, unlawful to be owned by private, and unlimited mining. So we have like PDAM, we have Inhutani, Aneka Tambang, and Bukit Asam, and many others. We have Industri Kereta Api, KAI, Percetakan Uang Negara, and many others, Pos Indonesia, Biro Klasifikasi, and Sukovindo, and many others. So we have unlimited mining like Aneka Tambang, Bukit Asam, and Public Perusahaan Listrik Negara, and others. So it's going to be public ownership. This is going to be the state that he is or they operate on these matters. So in conclusion, Islam is a comprehensive and universal way to life, provides different economic system from either capitalist and socialist. In this noble concept, Islamic economics harmonize and protect two interests, both present and hereafter, by involving state as deputy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God in the world, Khalifatullah, and also as holder of people trustworthiness based on primary resources, Al-Quran and An-Sunnah. I think that's all that we can discuss today. Then inshallah we are going to have discussions on our class. So ma'ati bitamaniya bitaufiq wan najah. Aku lu kali hada subhanakallah bihamdika asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.